Greetings! Welcome to the Devlog for hot dogs, horseshoes, and hand grenades. We're going to start off as always with a quick sound check. Make sure your speakers aren't up too high. Wonderful. So what have we got for you this week? Well, we've got a whole bunch of new handgun audio to show off to you. I'm not going to run through every single automatic handgun, just because that would take a while, but I did get them all done this week. It was quite a painstaking rebuild. But in addition to that, what we're going to be talking about this week is the reconstruction of the game's Recoil system. Something that I've never been quite happy with, but only recently have really sort of come up with a sort of simulation, mathy approach that I really like. So let's start off here with something about as diminutive as we can get. A Mark III. This is firing 22 long rifles, so it's most 22 LR guns. You could probably fire them against your teeth, and it wouldn't hurt. So let's take a look at that. Listen to a little bit of our handling audio. Let's duplicate that. Beautiful. Let's take some shots. So the first thing about the recoil system, which you're going to be seeing here as I play with all of these, is that there are multiple sorts of stability states that every firearm in H3 can have. One of them, obviously the least stabilized, is to simply have it in one hand and to fire it like so. As you can see, we get a little bit of muzzle rise here, but it's really diminutive because it's a 22. I'm, of course, shooting quite high. I think I have to fix the irons on this. But if I bring my second hand, and this is done by basically comparing the positions of your palms in the system, I'm going to actually, as I knock some things over, I'm going to actually show controller geo just so that it's more obvious where my hands are. So if I have my hands like this, and you can do it like this, you can have them crossed, you can even have a magazine in your hand, and it still counts as stabilized. We get even less muzzle rise. Obviously, I'm still shooting high, but at least I'm shooting consistently high. This should have locked. There we go. Put you back there. Wonderful. So let's move up the sort of power curve a little bit. Up from 22LR, we have something like a pocket pistol cartridge. This is a Bergmann Simplex, and its 8mm Bergmann cartridge is about what you'd expect from like a 32 ACP. So it's got a little more pop to it, but recovers really rapidly. Obviously, we only have 5 shots in there, but is totally tenable to fire pretty rapidly, one-handed, and still hit a sort of a giant wiener-sized group. So pop that over there. We then sort of jump up to something like a 9mm handgun. And in the current release sort of version on the store, firearms in this category have not been nearly as peppy as they should be. They've had a really sort of like lackadaisical recoil. And that's in part because in the version on the store that you all are playing now, stabilization only affects the total amount of muzzle rise that occurs. Whereas in the new simulation, it affects everything. It affects the sort of clamped rotation ranges, it affects wander, some internal inertia for the firearm, and what's called the recovery time, meaning how fast does the firearm return to true, and is that speed related in any way to whether your hand is moving or not. So we're going to take some shots. Let's clear this. One-handed with the M9. I'm actually going to bring this in closer so that you can see the stabilization difference in effect when I fire this as quickly as I possibly can. So I'm going to hold this as still as I can one-handed, and I'm going to fire this as fast as I can, which means I'm going to outrun the recovery time of the gun, and those shots are going to rise. So you'll notice I shot high, and it wandered a bunch at the top. And that's because as I said, I'm outrunning the ability for the gun to restabilize in my hand, firing it one-handed. If I were to fire slower one-handed, that obviously doesn't happen. However, if I do this with two-hand stabilization, I can fire very rapidly. And I still get that pop-up that happens in real life that momentarily sort of disrupts your sight picture that you have to learn to ignore, but I still get a really centralized group out of it. And that's the way that recoil functions here. Is it's not just about how much the firearm is rising, but it's about how fast it returns to true and how that influences how fast you can fire the gun. So for some extreme cases of this, let's say take our Desert Eagle, which should obviously be, this is, if with my programmer noodle arms, if I were to fire this in real life, I'd probably hit myself in the face with it. So we're going to get a ton of rise out of this, but you'll also notice that it does not return back down to true very fast when we fire one-handed. Cool, got that spawn locked, so we're going to fire. I actually have to wait for it. Now, as a comparison, if I were to do this as fast as I could, I'm going to aim a little bit to the left here, I'm probably just going to hit the ceiling a bunch. All over the place. Notice how that had a lot of horizontal wander to it. That's actually magnified if I'm moving my hand at the same time. Say if I was trying to track from left to right, firing one-handed. And that's one of the sort of added simulations that's now present, is that I'm tracking a sort of abstracted grip quality related to whether or not you are actually sort of allowing that muscular rebound to occur with a high recoil weapon. Once again, two-handed, we can do it slow. We can fire a bit faster and keep it grouped. But with something as powerful as the Deagle here, if I fire it as fast as I can, even two-hand stabilized, I get less rise out of it, but as you can see, I got a whole bunch of rotational wander. And that actually occurred in part because I let my hand twist as I was firing rapidly. If I had proper shooting form and actually kept the controller really stable while firing rapidly like that, I wouldn't get so much horizontal play out of it. And then on the other side of the sort of really extreme examples, from a recoil standpoint is our G22 full auto mod. Now note, because this is a G22 and not an 18, it's firing a hotter round. 40 SW has quite a bit of kick to it, which means that if you're actually able to fire this on a full auto, it would be pretty uncontrollable without a stock. And so that's what the G22 full auto mod actually is now. It's no longer this like high fire rate laser scalpel that you can engage things at 30 meters reliably with. And to help demonstrate this better, I'm actually going to switch over to tracers so that we can see this. So I'm going to put this back out to 15. Not that I'm going to be able to hit much with it. And so in real life, with especially a 40 SW machine pistol like this, you would actually only be taking 2 and 3 shot squeezes at most if you actually wanted to hit things. Make sure that's set up there. Oh. As you can see, we're hitting the ceiling almost immediately. This is probably still too intense. I'm still tweaking it. But basically, this pistol is now designed to engage at ranges of about around the corner, down hip firing, where you adjust for the extreme recoil by actually pulling the gun down. Let's see if I can do it at this range. How many did we get? Let's try another full mag and see how many hits we can get on it. There we go. So still a decent amount of 16 shots on target. So about a 50% hit rate of the target at that range, which is about what you should expect trying to just mag dump something like this without a stock with this cartridge. I do promise for those of you who are like, oh, I miss having a more accurate, full auto in this sort of form factor, there will be a G18 which will fire 9mm at some point in the future. Not all machine pistols are like this, though. Let's grab that mag. If we take something like our old French Union pistol here, this is only firing 32 ACP and is pretty heavy because we've got this huge mag here. So we don't get out of control muzzle rise on every machine pistol. It's only the ones like that, like the G22, that have this ludicrously high fire rate. So let's see how many we can get on target here. Oh, looks like we were shooting low. I bet I can do better if we do tracers. I still have not adjusted to the amount of muzzle rise for this. Let's try again. Ah, still not fantastic, but not shooting the ceiling the entire time as with the G22. Either way, part of the whole purpose of this, you might be like, why would you make these machine pistols so hard to use? Well, that's because in reality, a machine pistol has a very, very narrow usage pattern. They're not long-range weapons. They're not even mid-range weapons. You're both in the same room and you want to end someone fast kind of weapons. They're the sort of thing that works really well firing around a corner and dumping a mag really, really quickly while being in a compact form factor. They shouldn't be competing with SMGs for that sort of role. They are fundamentally different. So yeah. Fantastic. Oh, threw it short. And then lastly, in the category of pistol things, let's get all of this out of the way. Yonk. In fact, I can probably clean those up. I did wanted to mention, especially because someone recently asked about the cyber pistol and if it was ever going to be in the item spawner. I hadn't actually put it in because it didn't really fire a real cartridge. It fired a sort of antiquated one prior to me even building the game's ammo system. And while I was thinking about it, I realized that the 10mm DSM cartridge, the fictional one that I'd come up with for the 2019 Detective Special, seemed perfect for it. So that's what this fires now, which means it's about as peppy as a Deagle from a recoil standpoint. This has the Slugger cartridges in it. So yeah, so the Cyber Pistol will now be your sort of futuristic, sort of accelerated Magnum. So moving on, the other sort of set of things that I've gotten to this week is I've begun work on the submachine guns, starting with the open bolt ones. And in this case, I've been doing this primarily to see how the recoil system interacts with two-handed weapons. And so I'd like to grab a couple examples here to show you what that is like. So we're going to grab that. We should grab, oh, let's see, wrong magazine. Grab the grease gun here because these fire the same cartridge. And yeah, let's grab the MP34 because it's firing a 9mm. So as I mentioned before, we have multiple types of stabilization with a firearm. There's the two-hand kind, which does still work on long guns. It's inferior to other types of stabilization, like grabbing the foregrip and such, but it still is present, as there are certain types of sort of pseudo long gun, short guns, where you might still sort of grip it in terms of like small SMGs. So let's load a mag here. The second type of stabilization, obviously, is grabbing the foregrip, which we can do here, which really, really clamps down on your rotation, your sort of muzzle rise and your side-to-side rotational wander, but it doesn't do much for the backward kick of the firearm. And then lastly, we have independent shoulder stabilization. Now, when you hear me say that term, don't think that I'm actually changing the rotation of the firearm. I'm still not doing that, and I don't believe in doing so because it would only be a bad guess. What it does do is detect the proximity of the stock to a general sort of chest area that's super generous below your head to basically dampen both muzzle rise and a bunch of the backwards movement. So to compare this, let's actually use the grease gun, as it's 45 and it's punchier, and we can see the difference. Let's move this back into, let's just say 8, just so we can really see the, not closer still. Sorry to be so indecisive. So we're going to first fire this gun incorrectly, i.e. we're going to try to fire it like a pistol. So you'll notice that it wanders all about, and I was keeping my hand pretty still. One of the things that happens with bulky long guns like this one, ones that are heavy, is that momentarily any sort of rotation of the controller is magnified while you're firing. It's essentially you are making your hold on the gun less and less stable by torquing it in your wrist and sort of giving up some of the muscular stability of that. So if I try to move from, I'm going to try to move from there to there and back as I fire, and you'll see me overshoot it as a result. Notice how the firearm momentarily almost wanders past that inertia, so you end up having to compensate for it, and you end up overshooting back in the other direction, as would happen trying to fire a firearm this heavy, fully automatic. So let's now do this two-handed, but once again out in front of us still. We still get some wander, obviously, and there's still so, but we have so much more control. And then lastly, we're actually going to pull the stock out on this. I'm going to do my very best to just keep this on the center. I'm not great with these sights. Oh. Oh. Helps to do that first. Much tighter. So those are your sort of varying degrees of stability. Incidentally, you don't have to hold the foregrip to get some stability out of the shoulder. You'll still have a little bit of inertial wander, but you totally can just seat this in, especially if you're like reloading or you're throwing something or grabbing something. You can keep fire on a target as long as you make sure that that stock is in your shoulder. Notice how that's still more stable than when I was doing this, but it's still a little hard to control. And as I mentioned before, the whole point of these systems is to try to actually differentiate the various classes of firearm in the game into various combat roles and not make it so you can just willy-nilly use any firearm just out here as a pistol, thus making things like pistols no longer really relevant. So now that we've done that, let's see something lighter. So this is, as I mentioned before, our MP34, firing up stabilized. Can hold it pretty great there. And then we're going to do it unstabilized. Much harder. And as I said before, this one isn't going to be knocking us around quite to the degree that the grease gun is, but we're still going to get a little bit of inertial wander. You can see it in the little bits that the rotation of the gun deviates from the forward back of my controller. And then lastly, let's see this in a much more pronounced way with something like the Thompson, which both has just a stock configuration that makes it really want to rise and is a bit of a bullet hose. So once again, firing it out as a pistol, all over the place. This is not the gun to be trying to do this with. I can try to fight the wander and compensate for it, but it's not going to work super well. Once again, Thompson just into my shoulder, no foregrip stabilization. I can keep it tighter, but it's still going to rise on me a bunch. Thompson, firing correctly. Still have some wander. I still have to fight with micro adjustments to keep it on bead, but actually usable. That is the correct way to fire this. Let's do one more. Let's send it out to 15 and see how well we can do. A little harder, just holding down the fun switch. Make sure our stock is about where it should be. Not bad. Not bad at all for that range. That's pretty much all center of mass and head. So there you have it. That is the systems that I've been working on this past week. It's all still proceeding relative to plan and schedule, which has me happy. Before we go, let's just dump a whole bunch out of our M11-9. Let's see what we can do from this range with two-hand stabilization. Even hitting it. Beautiful. I think he's dead, Jenkins. Anywho, let's go ahead and jump out of VR now and talk about what I'm going to be working on this next week.
Yo! So out of VR, as you can see, I still have a bit of HMD face here from working right up to recording this devlog. In terms of what else I'm going to be working on this next week, I'm going to be finishing, filling out all of the sort of recoil and new audio parameters for the open bolt SMGs, as well as making it so that any sort of folding or sliding stocks that are present and don't function right now actually do so. After that, I'm probably actually going to jump over onto bolt actions, as that was, because there's only been 2 core bolt actions in the game, the Seiko and the Tactical 8400, I never really actually finished coding them, in that they don't really have safeties that are visible, and a number of like hammercock indicator pieces moving and things like that. So I actually have to go back and just finish my bolt action implementation, which will allow me over the coming months to go ahead and add the 6 or 7 of them that I have sweet models for, and I know you know what a couple of those are. And let's see, what else? After the bolt actions, I'm probably actually going to jump over to tube-fed shotguns. I'm still on the fence about whether I'm going to do one of 2 things. I'm either going to do the handgun style approach, where I just wipe my hands of the code base that existed prior and just approach it in I know how to do this better, so I'm going to do it better now, because that will just eliminate some bugs. I know some of you have tried to do the one-handed racking with a bunch of the pump shotguns, and that's been glitchy and it breaks sometimes. It sometimes breaks in the, what's it called? In the case of, come on, brain, you can do this. In the SPOS 12, switching between pump and semi-auto. And so, yeah, so I think I'm almost all the way to fully decided that I'm just going to jump in and recode tube-fed shotguns entirely, because they need it. And that's probably going to occupy all of the next week. Hopefully I'll have something fun to show in that regards. And in terms of more sort of long-term planning, I I actually went through all of the firearm models that I have on my hard drive, and well, you know how I said that I was going to have 250 total firearms in H3 by the end of 2018. Well, I already have all of those models, it turns out. I have more than I thought I did, so it will now be a matter of what sort of makes the cut for 2018 and what doesn't. And what as I think I mentioned last devlog, but I'll do so again, I'm going to be doing them in slightly more thematically coherent drops than I've done in the past. And so that grouping might be based around a type, it might be based around a specific country, it might be based around a specific country and time period, or a concept. And so you should expect that's how weapon drops are going to happen moving forward, is that they'll be sort of more thematically unified, and when appropriate, some aspect of some game mode in H3 will sort of come with that is thematically paired to it, whether that's new targets or new sequences and things, or new wiener bots with new weaponry. We will see. It all depends on how things go and how much time the sort of core firearm implementation ends up taking me. Well, that is about it for now. I know I spent quite a bit of time in VR, so this video is already going to be a little long. So I will leave you with this. I hope you like the way the new firearm audio is coming together. Just so you know, by the way, none of these shot sounds on the SMGs that you just saw are final. I'm just repurposing some existing sounds as we're mainly focused on handling stuff at the moment. Patrick is doing an absolutely stunning job in terms of putting together these sample sets, and I can't wait till I've put enough of the game back together to be able to do a beta, so I can get your folks' hands on everything and see how you enjoy both the new sound and the new recoil stuff. Well, I will all talk to you all later. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Peace.